Welcome to the St. Matthew's Episcopal Church podcast, coming to you from Northern Virginia. We're so glad you're here. Today, we hope our message inspires you to better know and share God's love. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and join our weekly newsletter, The Friday Flash, to stay updated on all of our events and services. Let's dive in.
Seated. So there are of them. We are going to talk about, I know much to the chagrin of many at 9:30, a passage we didn't read. We're going to talk about, if you want to start getting your Bibles out, Genesis 45. So the lectionary has us going through the Joseph story over the last couple of weeks. Many of you may know from, say, something like the musical or any other number of cultural touchstones, the basic idea of the Joseph story, right? Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers because they're jealous about him. And then he ends up the most powerful person besides the Pharaoh in the powerful kingdom of Egypt. And I want to talk about that story today because our theme today is love. That's our fruit of the Spirit. We're going through the fruits of the Spirit this summer. And love is one of those things that people have a lot of pithy ways of talking about, right? If those of you who've been to a wedding, you've probably heard 1 Corinthians 13. You've probably heard it ad nauseum. Love is patient, love is kind, and so forth, so on. And the thing is about that is that that's only useful if you know what patience is, if you know what kindness is. We had a sermon about kindness a few weeks ago. In fact, I'm told that St. Matt spent an entire summer on the idea of love a couple years back. So we could talk about these concepts in these abstract terms forever and maybe not make a whole lot of headway. You might meet people who say God is love, right? So if we know God, we know love. But of course, that assumes that you know God. And who among us could claim to know everything about God, right? So we're sort of stuck at an impasse. God is love is only useful insofar as you know a little bit of what God is or a little bit of what love is. Otherwise, it's just an interesting proposition, a syllogism, a tautological one at that. So what do? Well, thankfully, the scriptures are full of things beyond mere propositions. They are full of stories. They are full of poetry. They are full of showing us, rather than just telling us, what it means to love, or what God is, or what it means to be kind and patient. All good writers try to show their points rather than to just tell them. And that's what our Bible is mostly full of. And today, the Joseph story is just that sort of story. So the story begins in and around Genesis 42. If you kind of want to just skim it, I'm going to recall it as really quickly. So Joseph's the oldest son of Jacob's favorite wife. And the brothers are mad about the favoritism that he gets. He gets a coat, we're told, with sleeves. I guess they had lots of sleeveless jackets back in the day. But he had one with sleeves, and that was a big deal. In any event, he gets sold into slavery, right? They throw him into a pit. They're thinking about killing him, and they go, he's our brother. We don't kill him, but we're going to sell him into slavery. He ends up as a household servant in Egypt and works his way up through a series of, sort of miraculous but also faithful work on his point to being second in command of Egypt. He is the head of Pharaoh's household. He has power over the purse. He controls, the finances and the household, and he's, sort of like chief of staff almost, except plus one. And he also has the great idea to start a grain bank, right? So the idea is that when there's plenty of grain in good seasons, they store it, and then in famines, they can take from the bank and sell it to people because those people don't have crops. This comes in handy because there is a region-wide famine, and that's what brings Joseph's brothers to him. They come down from the land of Canaan and go to buy grain, and he sees them, and he recognizes them, but they do not recognize him. And we're not exactly sure, other than maybe it just makes for a great story, why he doesn't reveal himself immediately. But he kind of toys with them a bit. Maybe he's waiting for them to recognize him. Maybe he thinks it's obvious. He's wondering, how could you forget me? Whatever it is, he doesn't reveal himself. But what he does do is he notices that they came without his only full brother, Benjamin. So Benjamin's the youngest. Benjamin is the only other full brother. All these are half-brothers of Joseph. But the other brother of Rachel, the other son, I should say, of Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife, is Benjamin, and he was left behind. So he says, go back and get your youngest brother. It comes out in conversation. He doesn't just say, I know you have a brother. That would ruin the story. He said, it comes out in conversation that they had left one behind, and he says, go get that one. And he kind of forces their hand. There's like the implication he wouldn't sell any more grain unless they went and did this. Anyway, so he sends them back, and they come. And when they go to Jacob and say, we need to take Benjamin too, Jacob loses it, right? It's like my only other son from this wife, and you want to take him as well. But eventually, they coax Jacob into letting Benjamin come, and so they come down to Egypt. And Joseph just loves seeing his brother, right? He weeps at seeing his brother, and he comes up with a plan to keep Joseph in Egypt, to keep Benjamin in Egypt. He frames him for theft and says, I got to lock you up now, sorry. And at this point, the brothers lose it, right? The brothers are like, our dad is going to kill us. That's what they're thinking. And they're beside themselves. And Judah, one of the brothers, who had promised Jacob that he would bring Benjamin back, he tells Joseph, take me instead. It might have been Benjamin's theft, but take me in his place, and that way it will not kill our father to find out that his son is not coming back. And it's in that moment that we get the passage that was assigned for reading today. The passage assigned for reading today, can we throw it up there? Sorry to surprise you. Is Genesis 45, 1 to 15. I'm actually going to use it in this big old Bible that's here on the podium, which is pretty neat. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, send everyone away from me. So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And he said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, so dismayed they were at his presence. Right? You can see this scene. This scene is set. I mean, like they're like, oh, no. Like this brother of ours that we basically tried to kill is here. And he's the most powerful person in this very powerful empire. Like, this is it for us. We are going to be killed or in jail. We're going to be punished. We're going to have something happen to us. But if you go on, verse 4 says, Joseph said to his brothers, come closer to me. And they came closer. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. And he says, more or less, that it was all part of God's plan to put him in a position to save the region from famine, to preserve the family line of Egypt and the sort of chosen people, the people through whom God's covenant was supposed to be coming. He has this beautiful forgiveness, magnanimity. In fact, there's a church father whom actually I had not heard of, called Caesarius of Arles, and he has this great quote about Joseph here. He says, he loved them always, as with the love of their father. He did not recall that pit into which he had been thrown to be murdered. He did not think of himself, a brother sold for a price. Instead, he returned good for evil. And then verse 15, if you skip to the bottom, this was the end of our reading assigned for today. It says, and he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. That is this image we get, the story we get, this powerful climax to a story about what it means to love brothers, to forgive, to move past wrongs having been done. It's almost, I said this at the earlier service, it's almost as compelling a story as, Jesus heading toward the cross. I mean, this is an incredible just story to read. And if you want to read it front to back, you can start at Genesis 42, read to 47, skip a couple chapters, and then 50 is really where it ends. There's like a genealogy in there. You don't want to have to put up with that. But it's just such a good story to just sit down and read and learn from and absorb. But it's not just a great story meant to like entertain us, right? And I'm going to argue with you today that in the story, Joseph is a stand-in for God. Now, what's interesting is when I was doing research, I was so surprised that People generally don't do this. It's kind of more popular in Jewish tradition. For some reason, people are so obsessed with other aspects of the story that just the idea of Joseph being God here doesn't come through. So this is my disclaimer. So if you go and tell someone, do you know Joseph is kind of a stand-in for God in the story? And they go like, what are you talking about? You can blame Josh at St. Matthew's. This is me going out a little bit on a limb, right? But the more I studied the passage, the more it just jumped off the page. So I'm going to make that argument to you. And I'm going to argue that what this story is doing is showing us, rather than just telling us, what the character of God is and how God loves us. So, first piece of evidence. This is like I'm delivering an argument, a closing argument. First piece of evidence that we've seen, right, is that Joseph's brothers come to Egypt and fail to recognize him, right? He sees them the whole time. He knows them. He has feelings for them. We're told he's kind of continuously weeping in back rooms, hiding it when they come. But he's feeling this love and affection. And you have to imagine, it might even hurt more, the fact that they don't recognize him. You know, I mean, how much time has really passed? Like, how much time would need to pass before you recognize a brother, let alone a brother that you tried to kill? I feel like that would be seared into your brain. And they don't recognize him, right? And yet, even when they don't recognize him, he provides the grain for them, right? He provides for them. In fact, part of the story is that he provides grain for them and then hides the money they paid for the grain. He puts it back in their sacks so that when they get home, they've got both the money and the grain. And when they get scared, thinking, did he forget to charge us? Like, they actually go back and like try to pay him. And he goes, you know, God must have done that for you, is the response, right? And I think that's a little bit of breaking the fourth wall, right? God did that for you. Who did that? Oh, Joseph did that. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. And so he provides even when they've turned their back on him, right? And we know from the story of Israel, from the journey of Israel through the Old Testament in particular, that they're consistently turning away and being unfaithful to God, and God continues to hold up God's side of the bargain. No matter, in fact, one of the comparisons that's made in the prophets is that God is a faithful spouse to an unfaithful spouse. That Israel is unfaithful, constantly worshiping other gods and valuing other things, and yet God stays true. And that's the picture we get through Joseph here. He continues to provide. The other thing that's really interesting is that he can understand them, right? He can hear all their plans. They're speaking in the whatever old Hebrew or whatever it is language that they're speaking, the ancient Semitic language, and they think he's Egyptian, and he can't understand a word. So they're acting as if he's not around, as if he's not everywhere, as if he doesn't already know their plans and what they're doing, and he just sort of like, sits back. I can imagine him kind of smirking, like, they think I need this interpreter. Like, I got this. And I just think that's such an interesting part of the story, right? Because so often we imagine that our lives, our finances, everything is our own, that God is this other entity that maybe we approach on a Sunday. We act as if God isn't right there along us all the time, isn't right there to be leaned on when we need support, isn't there, to be disappointed when we turn away from following God. And the third point, and this one to me is really the kicker, and a lot of this happens in Genesis 50, but there's hints, like I mentioned earlier, is the narrative breaks the fourth wall all the time. So whether it's, like I said, Joseph saying, oh, God must have done that for you, or I love this one from Genesis, in Genesis 50, they approach Joseph asking for formal forgiveness. They're like, you can kind of get the sense, like, we want to make sure this isn't going to come back to bite us. Like, Joseph, you're good with this, right? Like, you forgive us. And his response to them is, am I in the place of God? And I actually think the reader should go like, well, yeah, that's literally, I mean, that's figuratively, like, that's exactly what I think the story is trying to do, is to put Joseph in the place of God. A few verses later, 50:21 says, after they talk a bit, Joseph says to them, have no fear. I myself will provide for you. And this is the end of the book of Genesis, by the way, right? This is like how the book of Genesis ends. This is before the Exodus happens. We get this, again, this assurance from Joseph, from the God character, that things, you've been forgiven, and what matters is going forward, I will provide for you. That's what matters. So I love this story, and I love how in the context of the Bible's narratives, I think it's clear who this story is about. It's about God, God's relationship to God's people, how no matter how much we turn our backs on God, God's love just overpowers all of that. As a parent, you tell your kids, of course, that you love them all the time, right? Like, and I'm always saying this, and I look at my kids, and like, they don't understand. Like, they do not, I love you, Tegan. She's like, why do you keep saying that to me? And I guess it is creepy, right, if you just say that. But as a parent, right, it communicates so much. It communicates that affection that maybe you had like the minute they sprung into the world. It communicates the hardship that you feel inside when they do something that hurts themselves, that you wish you could have saved them from. I mean, all these, that word love is carrying so much of your emotions, and it means so much to you. But to them, it's just a word, right? Love, okay. Love is patient, love is kind, blah, 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 blah. But what does matter to kids, and what they can detect from even the earliest ages, is when you show them that you love them. And there's one particular story that I had to go through my old sermons to see if I told this story to you guys before, and it doesn't look like I have, but I'm anticipating old Josh, right? Like if I'm still here in a few years, and I will be telling you this story again. This is my warning, my apology for when you hear this story over and over again. But this story was critical to my understanding both of love and of my relationship to God. So you're going to hear this story. But I was around 6, and for some reason I remember being in the bath, and my parents were asking me to do something, and I was not only did I not want to do it, I was convinced that it was an affront to my own dignity, right? And my dad must have said something like, well, my house, my rules, something like that. And I said, then I'm leaving. And I get out of the bath, and I dry myself off, and I put normal street clothes on. And the one thing I pack into a backpack, speaking of backpacks, is pajamas. Evidently, that's what I thought I needed. If I'm leaving home, you got to have pajamas. And I have in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to go to my grandma lived not even half a mile away, right? I'm going to go to grandma's house. That's where I'm going to live. She lets me eat cookies whenever I want and whatever. And so I'm walking down the street, and I instantly make a mistake. I go the wrong way. Now, I can get to my grandma's house, and it's about equidistant from either of two directions, but one direction, it's a very straight shot, and the other requires about 3 or 4 turns, right? And as I'm halfway down the block, I realize, ooh, I don't know. I don't know if it's a left or a right once I turn right here. I'm pretty sure it's a right, then left. And so, your brain is doing that. And then I'm farther down the street, and I'm past all the houses where, I know the neighbors and have, friends. I'm into, still the same block. I'm not that far. But I'm toward the houses where, you don't know the people who live there, And, of course, as a kid, you imagine, the old man who lives there, I think he's like a sorcerer or something, right? And so I'm starting to get scared. And finally, again, not even at the end of our long block, I'm like, I got to go back, right? My dad might literally kill me, but I'm going to die out here one way or another anyway. So it's worth the risk, right? So I turn around and I start walking back. And as I'm walking back, I see some things moving under a car, right? I think it's a cat or something. There's neighbors who had outside cats. And then I see, as I keep walking, a head pop out. And my dad had followed me down the street, hiding from car to car, so that I couldn't, so that I couldn't see that he'd been following me the whole way, right? He had been right behind me, and he's got this grin on his face, and I don't think it's at first I was like, is that I'm gonna kill you evil grin? No, it wasn't. It was pure joy. I can see it in my head now. It was pure joy. He must have thought, and I know this as a parent now, he probably thought this was hilarious, right? This was his evening entertainment. But to me, right, again, I was convinced that this was the end of my life. And he comes out from behind the car smiling, and he puts his arms out. And I just run into his arms, and we walk back and laugh about it. And to my knowledge, I don't recall. Maybe I got spanked so hard I forgot. But but to my knowledge, there was never any particular, punishment. He was willing to let it go. The lesson was learned in itself. But the more important lesson, right, wasn't just me learning that if I run away from home, I'm going to be completely helpless. The more important lesson was that when I turned around, I was accepted back. I was loved, right? There was my dad and I, to this day, disagree on all sorts of things, and as you get older, you grow apart, and it's harder to spend time around those people. That's just natural, right? That happens. But there is no doubt in my mind after that moment, for the rest of my life, no matter what happened between my dad and I, no matter what he was doing that I thought was wrong and evil to me or whatever, there was no doubt at that moment that my dad loved me. That was seared into my brain. Because as a 6-year-old, being told, I love you, that doesn't do anything, right? But being shown what love is, that can mean the world. That's what we get in the Joseph story, right? We get God showing Israel how much they are loved and cared for, not just told that they're loved. We get the story of love and relationship. And finally, you've probably connected these dots, but I get paid to be up here and help connect dots, so I'm sorry if this is boring to any of you. But notice what it is that finally has Joseph reveal himself. It was when Judah stepped up and offered himself for the life of Benjamin, right? That's not an accident. In John 15, Jesus says, there is no greater love than when someone gives his own life to save his friends. And that's what Judah does. It's Judah's act of love that brings Joseph and his brothers together, that ultimately gets Joseph to reveal his identity to his brothers. That's what reconciles them, that brings them together. Judah's sacrifice is what causes the reconciliation. Now, who also came from the line of Judah? Jesus. It's always a safe response in church. Jesus comes from the line of Judah and David, we're told. And it's Jesus' death on the cross for us that both gives us the example of love that we're supposed to follow, that self-sacrificial, forgiving love, but also is the thing that brings us and God together, that gives us the reconciliation that we feel when we're so separated from God. It reveals the identity of God to us, even in our broken world, in our broken minds, in our broken souls. So it's not a logical proposition, God is love, love is God. It's the story of a man dying on a cross to save sinners. That's the story that reveals the true nature of God to us. If you get to know Jesus and the story of his sacrifice, then you'll know love, and then you'll know God. So what is love? Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me. I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life." And he kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. Amen.
Thank you for listening. If you're in the Northern Virginia area, we invite you to join us for worship or any of our events. For directions, service times, and information about our online services, visit stmtts.org. That's stmtts.org. Until next time, go in peace and share God's love.